Good morning and welcome to another episode of Ask RPM. My name is Lloyd Ross and this is episode number 7. And today's topic is people have written into us wanting to know about what are the risks around property investing. And I love this topic. It's great because there's a lot of myths we can debunk here with the real risks of property investing. And there actually aren't a lot because of the nature of the type of asset that property is. But for whatever reason, we have these images or stories or worries in our head. And the worries are things like, am I going to lose everything? Am I going to lose my home? Is the property going to be vacant? Is the tenant going to cause me any dramas or trash the house, stuff like that? You know, this is what you're thinking, right? Like if you're going into a property investment, is the area going to grow? Is someone going to be able to buy it? When will I be able to sell it? What if interest rates go up? People want to protect their capital, like this, and within good reason, because it's hard to accumulate. So when people are going into a property investment, all these thoughts are going on in their head, and it can cause hesitation. People can freeze from fear of acting, and if they don't act, then they can miss an opportunity. That's called an error of omission. Or people can act and do it quickly without thinking too much, and they can make an error of commission. So what are I think it's important to decipher what the real risks are. So if we look at the options of what people can do with their savings, and usually people have all their savings in their principal place of residence, their home, and they put everything into their home mortgage, and so that's where their savings sit. And so let's say they had $400,000 worth of equity in their property investment. I think the objective is what do I do to build my wealth from that position? That's really the objective. And there's a whole range of investment vehicles you can choose from, but quite often people are really comfortable with property, and so the option is property. So they say, okay, where do I go from here and what are the risks? And if the objective is to build wealth, then at some point you have to do something. If you want to compound wealth or build it, you have to take the wealth that you have and compound it at an annual rate for a long time to build wealth. And so you can just pay your mortgage off and be debt free. And once you do that, then you can leave your savings in your mortgage and do nothing. And you can create savings outside that and build wealth slowly through cash accumulation and in your superannuation, of course. But most people want to compound it faster. So they look to utilize their home equity to purchase a property. And so what happens is they use a bit of their home equity for the deposit and the costs of the new property investment, and then they borrow the balance of the funds from the bank. The property's built usually, and it's rented out, and so you've got this tenant servicing the mortgage of the property investment. So you don't have to pay any of the money to service the mortgage of the property investment. You're obligated to, but the tenant's in there doing it for you. So what's the real risks? Let's have a think about this. The risks are that you may purchase, if you purchase secondhand, you may purchase a property that's got substantial damage to it you need to fix that you're not aware of if you haven't got a building inspection done. You may purchase a secondhand property that's got pests in it. You may purchase a secondhand property that's got asbestos in it. And there's certain things you have to do to rectify that secondhand dwelling, and that costs a lot of money. So that's probably the biggest risk. The second risk is around, am I going to be able to rent the property? And if you're buying a property within 30 minutes, even an hour, usually of a major capital city, I don't think you're going to have any issues. It's when you go into smaller towns, like a lot of people have this issue in the mining towns where they're out in these smaller areas and they probably had some issues with vacancy. If you ever find that there's a rental guarantee on a property, usually it means that it's hard to lease. So it's something I would steer clear of. There's a lot of that being offered in, say, the Brisbane CBD and the unit market at the moment because there's been a huge oversupply there. And so it's really important to understand that if you're close to a capital city and you've got a house, it's brand new, it's in an established estate, it's close to all the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, things of that caliber and that nature, then you're going to lease the property. It's very rare not to lease it in a growing city. In fact, in my experience, in our business, we just don't come across issues where a house will sit vacant for a long period of time. It just doesn't happen. But again, it comes down to the selection of the property, how close it is to the capital city, employment and jobs and population growth. The second one is, once it's leased, will the tenant trash it or cause damage to the property? And if you're buying property that's of high caliber, so you're in the range of say $450,000 up to $600,000 in Southeast Queensland, you're limiting the potential for damage from the tenant, because you're attracting a high quality tenant immediately, someone with higher income, higher education, someone that is not going to do those things. So we mitigate the likelihood of having tenant damage by just selecting a high caliber property to start with in a city that's growing. So straight away we limit the chances it's going to sit vacant by doing that, and we limit the chances that the tenant's going to do anything. Even in the unlikely or remote chance that the tenant is going to do something, every single property investment has to have an insurance policy on it with landlord insurance. So let's say the tenant did something, you can get an insurance policy claim payout to pay that, and you can find a new tenant. The other risks are this one that goes on in our head, like, what if I lose everything? Like, what if I lose my house? What if I lose it? Like, I've accumulated this wealth in my house, I don't want to lose my house, it's my family home, and all this stuff goes on in our heads. And the reality is that, let's say you've got a property investment, you use your home equity for the deposit and costs, and you borrow the money from the bank for your second property, and you've got a tenant in there. The reality is, if you lose your job, even without your property investment, if you lose your job, you're actually more likely to lose your home than your property investment. And let me tell you why. Because the tenant in your property investment hasn't lost his or her job. They're still paying the mortgage for you, whereas you're obligated to pay your own mortgage at home. Irrespective of having a property investment or not, you're obligated to pay that. So if you don't pay for 3 months, they will take you home. So if you own a property now with a mortgage and you're worried about losing your job, I wouldn't worry about losing your property investment. I'd be worried about losing your home. So my advice would be, get another job fast. If you feel that you're in an industry that's going sideways or backwards, and you feel like, oh, we're having redundancies at work and we're thinking about losing a job, put things in place to get a new one. Be proactive. That's my advice there, right? So don't sit on your laurels and wait for that to happen. Go and get another job, or have some backup plans in place. With your property investment, if you establish it and the tenant is in there paying the mortgage and the tenant loses their job, guess what? There's hundreds of thousands of other tenants. You just find a new one and they pay the mortgage. So if you've got a property investment, you lose your job, your property investment will be fine. You don't need to sell it. It's being serviced by the tenant. Maybe you need to sell your home because you're obligated to pay that. So property investing or not, this whole job loss thing, it's really about your home. Forget about property investing, it's about your home. So think about that first. Don't think that if you've established a property investment and you lose your job, you need to sell your property investment. It's just not something you need to do, so long as there's a tenant paying the mortgage. And it's not something we see at all, where someone invests in the property and they lose everything. I tell you what really happens in reality. This is when people do lose a lot. They have a house and they buy a property investment, and sometimes they buy 2 property investments, and they lose everything when they get divorced. That's really what happens. So you can see they go through court battles and things, and that's where we see most of the losses come from. Property investment planning, when the estate planning's wrong, when that sort of stuff happens. That's the reality. We don't see situations where someone buys a property investment and it goes backwards in value dramatically. We don't see where it sits vacant and they have to foreclose and sell it. We don't see any of that stuff. It just doesn't come. If you go and accumulate too many properties at once, and you're highly geared in, let's say, 4 properties, and you haven't really paid any off, and you see this increase in interest rates, that is a risk. I think that's a really fair risk to make. And if you're making that risk, you have to be ready for the consequences, because if you're having a doubling of the repayments and you've got 4 or 5 properties, you're going to feel the pinch. So don't accumulate too many properties too quickly. Do it steadily and understand the ramifications of doing that when you are doing it. So that's why with our clients we typically do 1 or 2 and then we let it sit for a while and we wait. We don't go too fast too soon. What are some of the other risks? I mean, they're the real key ones. That's what's in our heads, right? Like, lose everything. Will I find a tenant? What happens if I lose my job? And the reality is the consequences of those risks hardly ever transpire. I think one of the biggest things people worry about is if they're going to get growth. And it's a great worry to have because I think it's important to get growth. That's why you're doing this in the first place. If you're established in a growing capital city, in the Australian political system, the Australian healthcare system, a growing population, you buy it for a reasonable price, it's got a 5% yield coming out of it, and you hold it for like 12 to 15 years, you're going to do really well. One other thing I just thought of that actually does happen where people lose money. This is it, ready? This is the second thing. They lose it when they say, I'm in this for the long term. They always say that. I'm doing this for long term. And so 2 years rolls by and all of a sudden they're not doing it for the long term. Some other opportunity, some other shiny thing comes across their desk or their mind. A new business, a new venture, whatever it might be. Oh, I need to sell my property. Oh, I thought you were in it for the long term. Long term is 12 years or more. Fact. That's long term. Do not expect to make money in property quickly. Period. Just don't. Some people get lucky and they do. But you have to be in the market and patient. People want stuff now. So they get a property because it's a great thing and idea to do, but they really don't understand the principles of property investing, and it's long term. You know, people have made a hell of a lot of money from property, and they've held it for 30 or 40 years. The people in Sydney that have made massive wealth have held their properties for decades. Decades. If you look back at 1960 in Southeast Queensland on the Gold Coast, properties in 1960 were bought for £600 or $600 or $1,000, whatever it was, and now they're worth millions. They've held it for 50 years. Holding property long term is how you make money. So if you're saying I'll be patient, I'll be long term, actually stick to your guns and do that. Do not shoot yourself in the foot and sell your property 2 years later because you would have to pay another set of stamp duty, another set of legals, and the whole process and administration of it all. It's just a waste of time and a waste of money. And that's what we see most of. So when people get divorced, they have to sell quickly, they lose money. When people sell their property too quickly when they've just bought it, they don't lose money on the property itself. Typically they sell it for what they bought it for or more, but the costs of it are so high. Don't do that. Hold on to it. Buy a property and forget you even own it. And in 20, 30, 40, 50 years time, sell it if you really want to. But then, where do you put your money? I think the best thing is to buy a property, hold it forever, let the rents go up, get all this cash flow back, pay it off, and use it as a cash cow for retirement. That's really how powerful it can be when it's done like that. I hope that helps.